Before we begin, pause for just a second. What if the sister you've shared your entire life with laughed with, cried with, called? Your twin wasn't actually your sister at all. What if everything you thought you knew about your family was a lie? And what if that lie uncovered a hidden crime no one ever solved? If you're watching this late at night in your bedroom or scrolling from a cafe in Atlanta, Los Angeles, or even Johannesburg, trust me, you'll want to stick around. This isn't just a story. This is real. And the twist at the end, you won't see it coming. Oh, and if you're black, especially a black woman in America, you might just feel this story deep in your bones. It started with a TikTok trend. You know the one, take a DNA test with your twin and prove you're actually twins. For most people, it's just a laugh, a confirmation of what they already know. But for Zuri and Imani Carter, both 18, born and raised on the west side of Atlanta, Georgia, it was the moment that shattered everything. Zuri was the loud one, always dancing, always filming with her long box braids swinging, and a confidence that filled every room. Imani was more reserved, the book-smart sister who preferred libraries over lenses, but everyone agreed they were identical. Down to the dimples, the mole on their left cheek, and the way they tilted their heads when confused. That morning, Zuri bounced into their shared bedroom holding 2 little tubes and a test kit. Let's do it for the followers. Twin reveal. Challenge. You know it's gonna blow up, she grinned. Imani sighed already halfway into her AP government reading. It's a waste of time. We are twins, Zuri. But 10 minutes later their cheek swabs were sealed and mailed off. Just another piece of content in a long scroll of likes and hashtags. 2 weeks passed. Then came the email. Zuri opened it during lunch at school, standing in the middle of the cafeteria with friends crowding around her phone. Wait, why does it say we're 49, 8% related? Her voice dropped. The noise in the cafeteria didn't, but Zuri's world shrank into silence. Imani grabbed the phone, scrolled again. That can't be right. That has to be a glitch. Zuri shook her head. Glitch my ass. This says we're half-sisters. Not twins. Not even full sisters. The video captured their stunned faces, but what the camera didn't catch was the cold pit in Zuri's stomach that wouldn't go away. Something wasn't right. And not just in a funny, oh, we're not twins, after all kind of way. That night, Zuri couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling in their shared room, listening to Imani's steady breathing. She didn't feel like her sister. Not anymore. What if we weren't just separated? She whispered aloud, barely audible in the dark. What if one of us doesn't belong here? Imani turned. Stop! You're being dramatic. Zuri sat up. No, something's wrong, Imani. Look at us. Look at how Mom never talks about our birth. You remember any baby pictures, hospital stories? Birthdays before we were 5, silence. They both realized at the same moment that their earliest memories all started with Ruth, their grandmother, not Angela, the woman they called Mom. Angela had always been distant, not cruel, not unloving, just guarded. We don't talk about the past, she'd say whenever they asked. Ruth, their rock, had died of a stroke 5 years earlier. Since then, the photo albums had stayed closed, but now Zuri needed answers. The next morning, she snuck into the attic while Angela was at work. She rummaged through dusty boxes of Ruth's old things. Church programs, funeral fans, faded notes. And then she found it, a letter folded and yellowed written in Ruth's familiar script. I did what I had to. The child needed a home. No one else was going to love her the way we could. That was all it said. No names, no dates. But Zuri's hands were shaking. She showed Imani the letter after school. You see this? She took someone in, one of us. Imani snapped the paper away. You're making this into something it's not. Maybe it was about Mom. Maybe it was, I don't know, someone else. But Zuri couldn't stop now. She wanted facts. She wanted documents. She wanted to know why one of them shared only half her DNA with the other. So she called the company behind the DNA test, paid for the full report, accessed the raw data. And then she sought a potential family match, not a cousin, not an aunt, but a mother, a biological match, someone completely unknown to her. Living in Chicago that night, Zuri sat alone on the front porch. The Georgia air was thick and warm, but she felt cold. When Angela pulled into the driveway, Zuri stood. "I know one of us was adopted," she said, "and I think it was me." Angela stared at her. Silent, then finally said, "Come inside. We need to talk." If you're still here, first of all, thank you. That means you're just like us. Someone who can't let go of a mystery once it wraps around your soul. But here's the truth. If you thought part 1 was wild, you haven't seen anything yet. What Zuri was about to uncover wouldn't just shake her identity. It would drag up ghosts her family buried 16 years ago. If you're watching this right now, maybe you're on your break, maybe you're a black woman who's always wondered why certain things in your past never added up. Or maybe you're just fascinated by the strange ways DNA can tell a story that families refuse to speak aloud. Either way, don't just watch, hit that subscribe button because this story, it's about to explode. Angela Carter sat on the worn-down sofa in their small living room, her hands folded tight, knuckles white like she was praying, but this wasn't prayer. This was confession. Zuri stood across from her arms, crossed eyes burning with a hunger for truth she didn't even know she'd had until 2 weeks ago. Imani sat silently nearby, her mind spinning in quiet chaos. "You were never supposed to find out this way." Angela began. "We thought we had more time, or maybe we thought we'd never have to tell you at all." The air grew still. A fan creaked overhead, fighting the Georgia humidity. Zuri stepped forward. "Just tell me, who am I?" Angela looked up, and in that moment, the tough, silent woman they'd known their whole lives looked impossibly small, vulnerable, human. "Your name is Zuri. That hasn't changed, but you weren't born in Atlanta. You were born in Chicago. In a hospital that doesn't exist anymore." She paused. "Your mother's name is Patrice Hall. She was 17 when she gave birth to you." Zuri's lips parted slightly. "Is she alive?" Angela nodded. "She is. We didn't steal you. It wasn't like that. Patrice was in trouble. She just lost her mother. The father wasn't around. She didn't have support. We were part of a foster care volunteer program at the time. Ruth, your grandmother, she was friends with a social worker up there. Patrice wanted to give you a better chance." Zuri could barely process the words. "So she gave me away." Angela hesitated. "She asked Ruth to raise you, but then we never heard from her again." The silence that followed felt bottomless. But what Zuri didn't say, couldn't yet put into words, was that part of her had always felt different. She didn't look exactly like Imani. Their personalities didn't quite match. Zuri had often been told she acted too wild, too bold, especially by teachers who whispered under their breath about angry black girls like her. Meanwhile, Imani was always called the polite one, so articulate. Little things that once seemed like coincidence now felt loaded with truth. She wasn't Angela's daughter. She wasn't even from Georgia. She had been someone else's child, left behind. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Angela's voice cracked. "Because we loved you. You were our daughter. That's all we ever wanted you to feel." But that didn't answer the real question. Why the secrecy? Why the silence? For 18 years. Later that night, Zuri sat in her room staring at the message she'd typed but hadn't sent. It was to Patrice, the biological mother she'd found through the DNA site. Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsure if pressing send would fix things or make them worse. Imani came in quietly, her face unreadable. "So, I guess we're not twins after all." Zuri turned to her, hurt flashing in her eyes. "We still grew up side by side, didn't we?" Imani nodded. "Yeah, but it changes things." They were still sisters, but the DNA had drawn a line between them, a line neither of them had asked for. Zuri sighed. "You know what hurts most." It's not just that I'm adopted. It's that no one thought I deserved to know. Like my story didn't belong to me." Imani hesitated. "Maybe it wasn't about you not deserving it. Maybe it was about them being afraid. Afraid of the truth, of what it said about them, but Zuri couldn't help wondering if she hadn't taken that test, would anyone have ever told her? The next day, Zuri hit send. The message to Patrice was simple. "Hi, my name is Zuri. I believe I'm your daughter." 3 hours later, her phone buzzed. Zuri. "Oh my God, I've been waiting for this message for 16 years. Zuri's heart stopped. What followed was a long call full of tears and silences. Patrice, now 33, living in Chicago, was raw and honest. She told Zuri about how she had begged the system to find someone kind, someone who wouldn't let her baby girl end up lost in foster care. She had tried to write, but when her letters came back undelivered, she'd assumed the worst, that the family had moved or rejected the connection. "I never stopped thinking about you, Patrice," said, crying softly. "Every birthday, every holiday, I didn't know if you were alive. But I always hoped." Zuri sat on the porch that night, phone in hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't closure, but it was hers, her story, at last. And yet, something still didn't sit right. Why had Ruth's letter sounded so final? Why the secrecy? Why the sense of guilt in her words? The deeper Zuri dug, the more suspicious it all became. She pulled public records from Chicago's searched archives, and then on a dark website that cataloged missing children, she saw it a name. A photo, a baby girl reported missing in 2008. Zuri, Patrice Hall, reported stolen from a hospital. At 2 weeks old. Everything stopped. Her hands went cold. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear her own breath. "I wasn't given away," she whispered. "I was taken to be continued in Part 3, The Stolen Child." If you're still with us, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, you're going to want to know what Zuri does next. This isn't just about a DNA test. This is about identity injustice and the truth behind what happens when black girls go missing and no one bothers to look. Zuri had always known something was off, but this was criminal. She wasn't just adopted, she wasn't just left behind. She had been reported missing, stolen from a hospital in Chicago at just 2 weeks old, and for 16 years she had been living a lie, wrapped up in Sunday dinners, graduation photos, and the illusion of normalcy. Now the pieces were falling apart faster than she could catch them, and nothing, not even love, could protect her from the truth anymore. It started with a single web page. A grainy photograph of a brown-skinned infant wrapped in a pink hospital blanket. Underneath it, in bold, missing Zuri, Patrice Hall. Last seen, March 14, 2008. The birth date matched. The hospital name matched the real bombshell. The woman listed as her mother, Patrice Hall, was the same one she'd spoken to just days ago. Zuri refreshed the page again, half expecting the words to vanish as if they were just another glitch in a world that refused to stay real. But they didn't. And that meant something dark. Something that went beyond family secrets or adoption papers. Someone had lied, and someone had committed a crime. She confronted Angela that same night. Angela didn't deny it. She didn't even try. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, she said. Tears rolling down her face, Ruth said. Patrice changed her mind. She said the mother didn't want you anymore and that the papers had been signed. But she lied to me too, Zuri. I swear to God, she lied to me too. Zuri couldn't tell what was worse, that Ruth had orchestrated the kidnapping under the guise of rescue, or that Angela, the woman who had raised her, hadn't questioned it, hadn't checked, hadn't even considered that she might be raising someone else's baby, someone's stolen daughter. So what now? Zuri asked, her voice flat. Do we just pretend like this didn't happen? Angela shook her head. No, we have to make it right. But how do you make right 16 years of silence, of letting a black woman believe her baby had vanished without a trace? How do you fix a wound that big? Zuri took matters into her own hands. She called Patrice again, her voice shaking. She told her everything. The missing child report, the fake paperwork, the lie. Ruth had told everyone. And on the other end of the line, Patrice didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just breathed long and deep. "I always knew," she said. "Somewhere in me, I knew she hadn't given you up, but no one would listen. Not the police, not the hospital. They treated me like I was crazy, like I was irresponsible, like I didn't matter." And there it was, racist assumptions. The reason the system hadn't believed Patrice, the reason her case had gone cold so fast, the same system that labeled black women dramatic or unstable or negligent before they even opened their mouths, the same system that didn't search as hard, didn't follow up, didn't put her baby's face on the news because to them she was just another poor black girl who probably messed up. Zuri's blood boiled. She wasn't just uncovering a family secret. She was uncovering a failure that spanned hospitals, police departments, and maybe even her own grandmother. The next morning, Zuri packed a bag. "I'm going to Chicago," she told Angela. "I need to meet her. I need to know her. I need to see who I was supposed to be." Imani stood by the door watching quietly. "So I guess that makes me the twin who stayed behind," she said, forcing a smile. Zuri looked at her heart, twisting. "You're not just the one who stayed. You're still my sister." "That never changes," Imani nodded, but they both knew things would never be the same again. When Zuri arrived in Chicago, the city felt both foreign and strangely familiar. Patrice greeted her with cautious eyes and open arms. She lived in a small apartment with photos lining the walls, pictures of a life Zuri had never known. Baby shoes, birthday cards, a cake with the words "for Zuri," always written in frosting that no one ever got to eat. The reunion was emotional, but also awkward. There was no script for moments like these, no guidebook for how a mother meets her stolen daughter after 16 years of silence. They spent days talking, walking the city, trying to build a bridge between past and present. Zuri learned that Patrice had fought for years, filed appeals, called investigators, even hired a private detective. But every road led to a dead end. Because Ruth Carter had been careful. Meticulous. She'd changed hospital records, used her social worker contacts. She hadn't just taken Zuri, she'd erased her. And maybe in Ruth's mind, she believed she was saving a child, giving her a better life. But that didn't make it right. That didn't erase the trauma. Zuri filed a police report. She knew it might go nowhere. The statute of limitations had passed in some areas. Angela might face consequences even if she didn't know. But Zuri didn't care about revenge. She wanted recognition. She wanted the truth written down somewhere official. She wanted people to know what had been done, not just to her, but to her mother, to black women whose pain was too easily ignored. As her story spread first through online forums, then local news, then viral TikTok videos, it sparked something. Other stories began to surface. Other black mothers who'd lost children and never got answers. Other girls who'd taken DNA tests only to uncover long-buried truths. Twins who weren't really twins. Adoptions that were really abductions. Racist systems that had failed again and again. Zuri became more than just a name. She became a voice. A reminder that sometimes identity isn't just about who raised you, but who was silenced along the way. By the time she returned to Georgia, things had shifted. She and Angela were still in contact, but cautiously. The love was still there, buried under layers of betrayal. Imani hugged her tight at the airport, whispering, "You're still my sister, even if the blood doesn't say it." Zuri smiled. "We may not be twins, but we've survived the same fire, and that counts for something." She had lost a version of herself, but she had also gained something powerful. The truth, and she wasn't about to stop there. Ruth Carter was dead, buried in a quiet cemetery under a smooth gray stone that read, "Beloved Mother, Fearless Advocate, But the ghosts she left behind were loud screaming in Zuri's ears, echoing through court records and lurking in the corners of every lie that had shaped her life. Ruth wasn't just the woman who raised a family. She was the architect of a system built on silence, and Zuri was ready to burn that silence to the ground. Back in Georgia, Zuri knew there were questions only one person could answer. Unfortunately, that person had died 2 years earlier. 2 months before Zuri and Imani ever spit into that little DNA tube. 2 months before everything came undone. Still, the past leaves fingerprints, and Ruth Carter had left hers on everything. The first place Zuri went was Ruth's attic. Angela hadn't touched it since the funeral. It was packed tight with boxes, files, yellowing notebooks, and old legal pads with Ruth's scratchy cursive. She'd been a social worker for nearly 3 decades, a respected one. But as Zuri combed through the records, a darker pattern emerged. There were names she didn't recognize. Infants marked as voluntary surrenders with no signatures from birth parents. Mothers flagged as unfit without court orders. Handwritten memos that felt more like justifications than case notes. And one file stopped her heart. Cold. Hall Patrice. The name was there, so was a photo, Zuri as a newborn swaddled and sleeping. But next to it, scribbled in Ruth's own hand, were the words, "At risk, remove." Immediately, arrange private placement. Zuri sat back, hands shaking. There was no police order, no CPS file, no legal documentation at all, just Ruth's word and a system that had trusted it without question. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern. Zuri dug deeper, contacting former coworkers. Women who remembered Ruth from her early days in social work. Some were evasive, some were outright hostile, but one woman, Linda, who had retired 10 years prior, agreed to meet. "You're brave for looking into this," Linda said, her voice low. "A lot of people don't want to know what Ruth really did." She talked about the way Ruth targeted young single black mothers, how she'd label them unstable at risk, emotionally compromised code words that in the right circles were enough to push through a fast-track adoption. Linda admitted she'd been suspicious for years, but no one had dared challenge Ruth. She wore her whiteness like a badge, Linda said, and when it came to black women, the courts always gave her the benefit of the doubt. Always, there it was again. That word, racist, not shouted, not obvious, but systemic. Ruth hadn't needed slurs or insults. Her power came from the way she could erase black mothers with a pen stroke, and no one questioned her. Zuri felt rage build in her chest, tight and molten. Ruth had painted herself as a savior, but all Zuri could see now was the quiet destruction she'd left behind. That night Zuri returned home and confronted Angela again. "You didn't know, fine, but you lived with her. How could you not see?" Angela broke down. "I did. I saw things, I heard rumors, but she was my mother. Zuri. I loved her. I trusted her." Zuri stared at her eyes hard, and she stole me. From a black woman who never stopped looking for me, Angela had no answer. And maybe there wasn't one. Later, Imani sat beside Zuri on the porch. "She raised us both," Imani said, "but she lied to us both too. I keep wondering how many other girls like us are out there." Zuri nodded. "That's what I need to find out." She launched a digital campaign. Shashara, Justice, for Zuri, trended on X. She uploaded a video explaining her story, her face to the camera, her voice steady but furious. She showed old photos, shared Ruth's files, even read out loud the memo about Patrice Hall. Within a week, her inbox exploded. Women messaged her from Ohio, Michigan. Georgia and Louisiana stories poured in, some eerily similar. Some worse. Mothers who claimed their babies were taken after hospital visits. Women whose adoption records didn't line up. One message stood out. "My daughter was born in '96. I was told she died during labor, but I never saw a body, and your story sounds exactly like mine." Zuri knew she was onto something bigger. She contacted a journalist, then another. Soon, a documentary crew was calling, and through it all she kept recording every conversation, every tearful phone call, every new piece of evidence. because she wanted people to understand this wasn't a personal tragedy. It was a systemic failure that had operated in plain sight. She began visiting women who believed Ruth had taken their children. Some had found them. Others were still searching. Zuri sat with them, listened, cried with them. Black women who had spent decades being dismissed, ignored, and treated like collateral damage. "You're not just a stolen child," one woman told her. "You're the first one who's ever come back." Zuri realized she was becoming something more than just a victim. She was a witness, a whistleblower, and a warrior. Imani, too, began speaking out, despite the pain she stood by Zuri's side in interviews. "We may not be biological twins," she said in one segment, "but we were raised like sisters, and this story, it's not just about blood, it's about truth, and now their truth was spreading. But with exposure came risk." Zuri received anonymous emails, some supportive, others threatening. One warned her to stop digging. Another accused her of smearing a good woman's legacy. But Zuri didn't stop. She couldn't, because this wasn't about vengeance, it was about justice. And justice meant more voices, more eyes, more truth. If you're watching this and you followed Zuri's journey this far, now's the time to subscribe, because the next part of this story, it goes even deeper into the courts. The hospitals, the cold files, nobody wanted to reopen. The legacy of Ruth Carter is crumbling, and Zuri is holding the match. Don't miss the final chapter where secrets come to light, identities are reclaimed, and a stolen childhood finally gets the ending it deserves. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe because stories like Zuri's aren't just rare, they're reminders of how far we've come and how far we still have to go. The truth was like a virus spreading faster than Zuri had ever expected. But when it finally reached its climax, when everything came crashing together, it wasn't just the past that was exposed, it was a whole new world waiting to be rewritten. The last file was the key, and it had always been in plain sight. Zuri had known she was getting close. The whispers, the warnings, the secret meetings, they were all part of a larger story, one she hadn't even fully understood yet. But the closer she got to the truth, the clearer it became. The last file, the one Ruth had kept locked away for over 2 decades, held the answers to everything. And Zuri was determined to get her hands on it. The final piece came late one night. Zuri was back at the local archives, her fingers sore from digging through hundreds of pages, each one heavier than the last. She'd been here before combing through the records, but tonight she felt like something was about to click. As she flipped through the final folders, a piece of paper fell from between 2 files. It was old, tattered at the edges, yellowed with age, but it was the name that caught her attention. Jackson, Patrice. Zuri froze. Patrice. Jackson had been the woman in the first file, the name she had seen just a few weeks ago, the same woman whose child Ruth had taken all those years ago, but this was different. This file wasn't just a note from Ruth. It was a full report detailing the final steps of the adoption process. The document was chilling in its simplicity. Ruth had arranged everything without a court order, without consent, and without a single voice questioning her authority. Zuri felt the weight of betrayal crushing her chest. Patrice Jackson wasn't just a name on a paper. She wasn't just a black woman lost in the system. She was Zuri's real mother. Suddenly, it all made sense. Zuri had always known something was wrong. The memories didn't add up. The feeling of displacement, of being torn from somewhere she didn't quite belong. She had spent her whole life wondering why she felt so different, why Ruth had kept so many secrets. But now it was clear Ruth hadn't just raised her. Ruth had stolen her, and Zuri wasn't the only one. As Zuri stood there staring at the file in her hands, a sense of urgency flooded her. She wasn't just fighting for justice for herself. She was fighting for all the twins, like her children separated from their families, erased from the world they were meant to belong to. And this wasn't just a personal fight. It was a fight against a system that had failed time and time again, a system that had allowed racism to thrive in the most insidious of ways. Zuri wasn't alone in this battle. Imani, her sister by choice, had been with her every step of the way. The bond they shared was undeniable. Two women connected by something deeper than blood. They weren't just fighting for their own histories. They were fighting for the women who had been silenced, the women who had been erased, the women who had never had a voice. Now they had the last piece of the puzzle. Imani was the first to speak. "Zuri, do you know what this means?" she asked, her voice trembling. Zuri nodded. "It means we can't stop now. We can't let Ruth win this." They both knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a story about stolen babies or a corrupt adoption system. This was about a culture of silence that had allowed racism to persist for decades. It was about reclaiming identities that had been wiped out, about giving families back their lost members. The next day, they went public. Zuri, Imani, and the newly uncovered documents were everywhere on the news, on social media, in courtrooms. The world couldn't ignore the truth anymore. And it wasn't just Zuri's fight anymore. It was a movement. They started with Patrice Jackson. Zuri met her mother for the first time in a small, quiet room, both of them unsure of what to say. The woman who had given birth to her. The woman whose life had been shattered when her child was taken from her. Looked at Zuri with eyes full of sorrow and disbelief. She had spent years wondering what had happened to her baby, and now here she was staring into the face of the child she had lost. "I never gave up on you, Patrice," whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I knew one day we'd find each other." Zuri reached out her hand, trembling, and held her mother for the first time. It wasn't just a reunion, it was a reclamation of everything that had been stolen: identity, history, family. Zuri finally understood that she wasn't just a victim of Ruth's lies. She was a survivor, and now she was standing with a woman who had never stopped looking for her. But the fight wasn't over. As Zuri and Imani spoke out, as they shared their story with the world, they uncovered more families who had been wronged, more children who had been lost, more Black women who had suffered in silence. And each one of them had a story to tell, a story of pain, loss, and a deep-seated desire for justice. The legal battles raged on, but Zuri felt a sense of power she had never known before. The truth was finally out. Ruth Carter's legacy, one of manipulation, lies, and racism, was crumbling, and it was Zuri who had brought it down. But there was one final question. What would happen now? What would happen when Ruth's influence was gone, when the system she had manipulated for so long was exposed? Zuri looked at Imani, at the thousands of people following their journey. And she knew the fight for justice wasn't over. It was only just beginning. "This isn't just about us," Zuri said. "It's about all the women like us. It's about taking back what was stolen. And we're not stopping until every last story is heard." As they stood together, knowing the fight wasn't over yet, they made a pledge to never forget what had been lost and to never let the world forget. Either Ruth had stolen their past, but Zuri and Imani were reclaiming their future. "Stay with us," Zuri said, looking straight into the camera. "Don't let this story fade. Like, share, and subscribe, because this is just the beginning." And with that, the final chapter of Ruth's lies was over. But the real story, the one about truth, justice, and the Black women who would never be silenced, had only just begun. Thank you for watching the full journey of Zuri Imani and the fight for justice. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story.